In 1959, a chairmaker in Berea, Kentucky, finished a set of dining chairs with nothing but a can of linseed oil, a rag, and his own 2 hands. 60 years later, those chairs sit in a farmhouse with a warm, deep glow no factory finish has ever matched. He did not own a single product from the finish aisle. He had 1 amber can on the shelf, and out of it came a furniture finish, a rust preventive for his tools, a conditioner for his leather, and a revival for every tired piece of wood in the county. People drove past 2 hardware stores to have him finish their furniture because they knew the oil went into the wood and became part of it instead of sitting on top like a plastic skin. The way he brought a gray, weathered old table back to life is number 7 on this list. And the one thing that chairmaker knew about this oil that could save your whole house, the thing almost nobody is taught anymore, is number 1. He was not a rare man. In 1959, there was an old-timer like him in every town, a person who kept a can of linseed oil and knew a dozen uses for it that we have handed over to a dozen separate products. They understood something we have paid dearly to forget. 1, natural oil, understood deeply, did the work of a whole shelf of cans. We traded that away. We were handed a separate bottle for every job, a wood finish, a rust spray, a leather balm, each sold for 1 task and dried up in a drawer a year later. That knowledge did not die because it stopped working. A can of linseed oil finishes wood today exactly as it did in 1959 and outlasts most of what has replaced it. It died because there is no money in a person who already owns the answer. Number 14 keeps a garden tool from rusting all winter with a wipe of this oil for almost nothing. Number 7 is the one from the top of this story, bringing a dry, gray, weathered piece of wood back to life. And number 1 is not a trick at all. It is the single thing every one of these old-timers knew about this oil, the thing that separates a beautiful finish from a house fire. Once you know it, every other trick here is safe to use. These 20 tricks were never about a can of oil. They were the mark of a person who understood one cheap, natural thing so completely it replaced a whole shelf of expensive ones. Not a product, a skill. Every trick on this list, that Berea chairmaker had in his own 2 hands. But before the first one, we have to be honest about the one real danger of this oil because the old-timers respected it, and respect was the whole secret. If that kind of know-how is worth remembering, subscribe and stay to the end, because the last one is the one that matters most. Let us count down the 20 lost linseed oil tricks old-timers swore by that outperform anything at the hardware store. Number 20, the hand-rubbed furniture finish. A person buys polyurethane, brushes on a thick plastic coat, and ends up with a finish that sits on top and peels when it fails. The old way went into the wood. You wipe a thin coat of boiled linseed oil onto clean, sanded wood, let it soak 15 or 20 minutes, and wipe every bit of excess off. Then let it dry a day and do it again. Each thin coat penetrates and ambers the grain, and after a few coats, buffed by hand, the wood glows from within. Thin coats and wipe off the excess, always, because oil left thick on the surface stays tacky forever. For the chairmaker, this hand-rubbed finish was why his furniture looked alive, where a factory finish looked dead. Not a skin on top of the wood, a finish that soaks into it. Number 19. Reviving a dried-out wooden handle. An axe or hammer handle dries out, goes gray and splintery, and a person throws the tool away or the handle snaps in use. A drink of linseed oil brings the wood back and makes it safe. You wipe a generous coat into the bare, dry handle, let it drink its fill overnight, and wipe off what has not soaked in. The oil restores the flex the dry wood had lost, so the handle grips better and resists cracking under a swing. For the man who could not afford a new handle every season, this soaked-in oil made one last for decades. A dry handle is a handle that breaks and hurts you, and this simple oiling kept it whole. Not a handle you replace. Dry wood you feed. Number 18, sealing and protecting outdoor wood. A person buys a deck sealer that peels and flakes in a year and must be stripped before it is redone. Linseed oil never peels because it lives in the wood. You brush 2 or 3 thin coats onto clean, dry, outdoor wood, a fence, a bench, a barn board, letting each soak in and wiping the excess. Reapply a fresh coat once a year. Because the oil penetrates instead of forming a film, it can never peel, only wear, and a wipe of fresh oil renews it with no stripping. For the family with a weathered old porch, oiled woodshed reign for years and never once flaked. Not a coating that peels, an oil that renews with a wipe.
Before we go on, I made something special for you. A guide for men like us who still believe a man should be able to fix his own home. It's the forgotten handyman secrets, the old-fashioned repair tricks our grandfathers used to fix anything around the house and keep it running for life. But these skills are disappearing fast, and once they're gone for good. Don't pay a repairman ever again. Scan the QR code on screen or click the link below. Go ahead, I'll wait right here.
Number 17, thinning the oil to drive it deeper. A person paints a thick sealer on rough outdoor wood, and it sits on the surface, never soaking in. The old-timers thinned the oil so it drove deep. You cut boiled linseed oil with a bit of natural turpentine. That thins it so it penetrates far deeper into dense or weathered wood, carrying the protection down into the grain. That deeper soak is why the old recipe outlasted a surface coat by years. Keep it from any flame while the turpentine flashes off, and let it cure fully. For the chairmaker, this thinned mix was how he drove protection into the hardest, driest old wood. Not oil that sits on dense wood, a thinned oil that drives in. Number 16, conditioning and saving old leather. A harness, a pair of work boots, or an old belt dries out, stiffens, and cracks. And a person buys a costly balm in a tiny tin. A little linseed oil feeds the leather and brings it back. You wipe a light coat into clean, dry leather, let it soak in, and buff off the excess. The stiff, thirsty leather turns supple, dark, and water-resistant again. Use it sparingly and test a hidden spot, because a little goes a long way and will darken the leather. For the farmer with harness and boots he could not replace, this oil kept his leather alive for years past its time. Not a tiny tin of balm, an oil that feeds the hide. Number 15, glazing a window with linseed putty. A pane works loose in an old sash, and a person hunts for a specialty product to bed the glass. The old glazier's putty was linseed oil and nothing fancy. You knead boiled linseed oil into powdered whiting, chalk, until it forms a stiff, smooth putty. Then press it into the rabbet of the sash to bed the glass, tooling it to a neat bevel with a knife. As the oil cures, the putty sets hard and holds the pane tight and weather-tight for decades. For the old-timer reglazing a drafty window, this homemade putty did what no tube from the store could match for lifespan. Not a pane you take to a glazier, glass you bed in linseed putty. Number 14, keeping rust off garden and hand tools. A shovel, a hoe, or a saw blade sits in a damp shed and comes out pitted with rust, harder to use and dying early. A wipe of boiled linseed oil leaves a barrier that holds the rust off. You clean the metal and wipe on a thin coat of boiled linseed oil, letting it cure into a hard, thin film that seals moisture away from the steel. Use it on the non-moving metal, the blades and shovel faces, not the joints where it would gum up. For the man whose tools lived in a damp barn, this yearly wipe of oil doubled their life for pennies. Not tools that rust away. A barrier the oil leaves behind. Stop the count for a moment, because there is one thing about this oil that every old-timer respected and that almost nobody warns you about anymore, and it is not a small thing. Linseed oil does not dry by evaporating. It cures by oxidizing, by pulling in oxygen from the air, and that reaction gives off heat. On a wiped surface, that heat vanishes into the air and nothing happens. But a rag soaked in oil and balled up in a corner traps that heat inside itself. The temperature climbs and climbs until the rag bursts into flame on its own, with no spark, hours after you set it down. This is not a rare freak event. Oily rags left in a heap have burned down garages, barns, and houses quietly in the night, long after the work was done. The old-timers were not casual about this. When they finished a job, they took every oily rag outside and spread it flat on the bare ground or a wire where the heat could escape, or dropped it in a metal can of water with a tight lid. They never, ever left an oily rag balled up in the shop. The oil is wonderful. It is also the reason a careful man treats every used rag like a live coal, because that is exactly what it can become. Number 13, making a warm, penetrating wood stain. A person buys a stain that sits on the surface as a muddy film and hides the grain. The old-timers colored the oil itself. You mix a little natural pigment or earth color into boiled linseed oil and wipe it on. It carries the color down into the grain as it penetrates, coloring and finishing in one step and leaving the grain glowing. Because the color goes in with the oil, it never looks like a painted-on film. For the chairmaker matching a new piece to an old one, oil-borne color did what no surface stain could. Not a muddy film that hides the grain, a color that sinks in with the oil. Number 12, finishing and protecting a gun stock. A rifle or shotgun stock goes dry and dull, and a person buys a special finish at a premium for a tiny bottle. The traditional gun stock finish was linseed oil rubbed in by hand. You work thin coats into the bare wood of the stock with your fingers, letting each dry and buffing between coats. That builds a deep, hand-rubbed finish that protects the wood and feels like part of the gun. This is the finish generations of fine stocks wore, and it renews forever with one more coat. For the hunter who cared for his grandfather's gun, this finish, built up by hand, kept the stock alive across generations, warm in the hands on a cold morning. Not a pricey bottle of stock finish, the oil that finished them for a century. Number 11, protecting decorative ironwork and old hardware. A cast iron gate, old hinges, a boot scraper, or an ornamental iron piece rusts the moment the damp climbs, and a person coats it in a paint that chips and hides the iron. A cured coat of linseed oil seals it without a film. You wipe a thin coat onto the clean, dry ironwork and let it cure hard. It leaves a thin, dark skin that holds off moisture while keeping the look of bare iron. Renew it when the damp seasons come, because it is a thin film, not armor. For the family with old iron hinges and fittings, this cured oil kept them sound and handsome for years. Not a paint that hides the iron, a cured film that seals it. Number 10. rescuing a dried-out wooden tool, tote, or box. A wooden toolbox or tote dries out over years, the joints loosen, and the wood goes brittle and gray. A soaking of linseed oil brings the whole thing back. You brush boiled linseed oil generously over the dry wood inside and out, let it drink deeply, and wipe the excess. The wood swells slightly, tightens at the joints, and regains its strength and color. The oil restores what the years of dryness took out of the wood. For the man who inherited his father's toolbox, this soaking brought a brittle old box back to solid, handsome life. Not a box you rebuild, dry joints you swell tight. Here is the part of his story we have skipped. The Berea chairmaker did not always treat this oil with the respect he preached. He learned it the hard way in 1938 when he was young and careless in his first shop. He had spent an evening rubbing oil into a set of chairs, and at the end of the night he wiped his hands on a rag, tossed it into a basket of other rags in the corner, and went home to bed. He came back the next morning to a scorched wall, a burned-out basket, and a black ring on the floor, a fire that had gone out on its own only because nothing close enough could catch. It could have been the whole shop, and the shop was attached to a neighbor's house. An older cabinet maker, a man who had seen it before, did not lecture him. He picked up the crumbling, burned rag, held it up, and said the only thing about the trade the young man never forgot. "The oil wants to burn, son. Give it somewhere safe to do it, or it takes the shop with it." From that morning on, he never once left an oily rag balled up, and he taught every helper who ever passed through the same lesson first. And that lesson, the plainest and most important thing about this whole humble oil, is number 1. Number 9. Making an old wooden floor glow again. An old plank floor goes dry, gray, and lifeless underfoot, and a person is quoted a fortune to sand and refinish it. The old way fed the wood instead of grinding it away. You clean the floor well, wipe on thin coats, let each soak and cure, and buff it. The tired planks drink it in and come back deep, warm, and rich with the grain glowing. Thin coats and full curing between them, so the floor is protected and not tacky. For the family in an old farmhouse, oiled floors looked a century deep instead of worn out. Not a floor you sand to bare wood. Old planks you feed. Number 8. Sealing raw wood against water without plastic. A person wants to waterproof bare wood and reaches for a plastic-looking sealer that changes the whole feel of it. Linseed oil makes wood shed water while still looking and feeling like wood. You work several thin coats into the raw wood, curing between coats. The cured oil in the grain makes the surface repel water while keeping the natural texture and warmth. It sheds a splash and wipes dry, no plastic film in sight. For the person who hated a synthetic finish, oiled wood stayed real wood that still turned water, not a plastic skin, wood that still breathes and sheds rain. Number 7, bringing gray, weathered wood back to life. This is the trick from the top of our story, the one that saved that old table. A piece of outdoor or neglected wood goes silver gray and rough as the surface oxidizes and dies, and a person hauls it to the dump. The oil brings the dead surface back. You clean the gray wood and wipe on a coat of boiled linseed oil. The color floods back as the oil penetrates the starved, oxidized fibers and revives the grain underneath. What looked like ruined gray barn wood turns rich and warm and alive again in one pass. For the chairmaker, this revival was almost magic, turning wood people had written off into their favorite piece in the house. Not weathered wood you throw out, gray fibers you bring back. Number 6. Sealing porous terracotta and stone. A clay flower pot wicks water and cracks in the first frost, and a stone sill or a concrete step drinks up damp and stains, and a person buys a masonry sealer in a jug. A wipe of linseed oil seals the pores instead. You brush boiled linseed oil onto the clean, dry terracotta or stone, let it soak into the thirsty pores, and wipe the excess. The cured oil slows the water that cracks the clay or stains the stone. On a flower pot, oil only the outside, never where roots and soil sit. For the gardener whose pots split every winter, sealed ones lived for years. Not a jug of masonry sealer, pores the oil fills. Number 5. Preserving the wooden parts of old machinery. The wooden handles, knobs, and fittings on old machines dry out, crack, and fall apart, and no replacement exists for a part no one makes. Linseed oil preserves the wood that keeps a machine whole. You wipe the oil into every wooden part of the old machine, let it soak and cure. The dried, cracking wood is fed and stabilized, so it holds together for many more years. It is the same feeding that saved the furniture, turned to the wood machines depend on. For the man keeping an old machine alive, oiling its wooden parts kept it running when no new part existed. Not a wooden part you cannot replace. Old wood, the oil keeps sound. Number 4. Mixing the old oil and beeswax paste. A person buys a tin of wax, a can of oil, and a bottle of polish. 3 products for one job. The old-timers made one paste that did it all. You warm boiled linseed oil and melt in a little beeswax. The paste that cools out of it feeds the wood with the oil and leaves a soft sheen from the wax. In one wipe on, buff-off step. The oil nourishes and the wax protects, together from one homemade tin that costs almost nothing. For the chairmaker, this oil and wax paste was the final touch that made his work feel finished and warm. Not 3 products for one job, one paste that does it all. Number 3. Understanding boiled from raw and never confusing them. By now the oil has done the work of a dozen products, and the secret under all of it was knowing which oil to use, because there are 2 and they are not the same. Boiled linseed oil has dryers added so it cures in a day or 2. It is what you use for nearly all of this: the furniture, the tools, the metal, the floors. Raw linseed oil has nothing added and cures slowly, over weeks, but it is pure and the only one safe on anything that touches food. You reach for boiled oil for speed and for finishing, and raw oil only where food or slowness demands it, and you never mistake one for the other. For the chairmaker, knowing boiled from raw was the difference between a finish that cured and one that stayed wet for a month. Not one oil for everything, 2 oils, each for its own work. Number 2. Never putting the wrong oil where food will touch it. The most important knowledge after the fire was about what touches your food, because the fast, convenient oil is not safe for it. Boiled linseed oil cures fast precisely because it has metallic dryers mixed in, and those dryers are not something you want migrating into your food. So on a cutting board, a butcher block, a salad bowl, or a wooden spoon, you never use boiled oil. You use only pure raw linseed oil, nothing but flaxseed, food safe once cured, the same oil sold as a health food. You accept its slow cure as the price of a finish that is safe to eat off of. For the family whose kitchen wood he finished, the chairmaker used only the raw oil because he would not put dryers where their food would be. Not the fast oil on your cutting board, the pure one that is safe to eat off. Number 1. respecting that the rags can burn your house down. And it is the thing this whole list has been circling since the first minute. Before any single finish or trick on this list, the Berea chairmaker knew one thing about this oil that mattered more than every use combined. The rags can catch fire on their own. Linseed oil cures by taking in oxygen and giving off heat. A used rag balled up holds that heat inside until it climbs high enough to burst into flame with no spark, hours after the work is done. So he never left a used rag in a heap. Every oily rag went outside, spread flat on the bare ground or a wire where the heat could escape, or into a sealed metal can of water. Every time, no exceptions. Here is the part worth sitting with, and it is the whole point of this list. Every other trick on here can save you money or save a thing you love. This one saves your house. And it is the thing about linseed oil that almost no one is taught anymore because the can says little about it and the finish videos rush right past it. The oil is genuinely wonderful, one cheap natural thing that finishes, protects, revives, and outlasts a whole shelf of store cans. But it is only wonderful in the hands of someone who respects what it is, and what it is, underneath all 20 of these tricks, is an oil that makes its own heat. Spread the rags flat to dry, or drown them in a sealed metal can. Always. Not the most clever trick on this list, the plainest, and the only one that keeps every other one from costing you everything. None of it needed a shelf of products. That was the point, and it is the thing the finish aisle will never tell you. A person who understood one humble oil all the way down owed nothing to a row of single-purpose cans. They fed the dry handle and revived the gray board. They sealed the tool against rust and rubbed the deep glow into the chair. They colored with it, waxed with it, and waterproofed with it, and they knew boiled from raw and kept the dryers away from the family's food. And they did all of it while respecting the one hard truth about the oil, that its rags make their own fire, treating every one like a live coal. That knowledge was never taken from us for our safety. If anything, it was the opposite, because the most important part, the part about the fire, is the part that got dropped first. It was buried because there is no money in a person who already owns the answer and knows how to use it without burning the house down. We did not lose the oil. It is a few dollars a can on the bottom shelf of every hardware store in the country. What we lost was the person who knew it completely, and an old cabinet maker said it best, holding up a burned rag. The oil wants to burn, son. Give it somewhere safe to do it, or it takes the shop with it.